What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that brings you the best guests in all of true crime. Of course, all eyes remain on Walterboro, South Carolina, as the double murder trial of embattled former attorney Alex Murdaugh is about to enter its third week. He's accused, of course, of shooting to death his wife Maggie and son Paul. But who is Maggie really? What kind of relationship did she have with Alec? Carm, my beautiful mother, who's looking at her notes, a licensed therapist and Holocaust survivor, gives us her take on this chilling double murder case that's gripping the nation. And all that is just a fraction of the story. Our other best guest here to break it all down, a friend of the show, you've seen her before, Susan Constantine, is one of the nation's leading jury consultants. She's also a body language and communication expert. She owns the Human Behavior Lab, where she does subjective analysis of potential jurors' body language, voice, and statements during voir dire. She assists attorneys to spot potentially dangerous jurors who may render an unfavorable verdict. Now, without further ado, some quick housekeeping notes. Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Twitter, we're at Podcast STS. As both my 7 and 8-year-old daughters like to say, please subscribe and hit that like button. It gets the algorithm chugging. And please support my lovely aging mother on Patreon.
I am retired. You don't have to support me. I get Social Security.
So listen, today we are going to focus the conversation on one of the main characters, if you will, in this entire saga known as the Alex Murdaugh trial, and that is Maggie Murdaugh. She is known to some as Margaret Kennedy Brandstetter. That is her maiden name. She's the granddaughter of a barber from rural Kentucky, very humble beginnings. Now, a source close to the Murdaugh family told the Daily Mail, among other media outlets, that Alec and Maggie's marriage was in crisis.
Wait a minute. You are going to preempt everything if you are giving away that part already.
Carm, we'll get into it. Don't you worry. Like my mom and I, the couple repeatedly argued over money and his drug use in the weeks before her brutal shooting. I need to be on drugs to get through this. Maggie demanded answers about their dwindling funds after a check bounced at a charity luncheon. And they said she had confronted Alec about money more than once, and his response was always the same. Alec would say, leave it to me. I'll figure it out just like I did the last time. Carm, you called me. There was an uproar. People said, we want Carm back on the show. They were tired of the cutout. You were here in person, although at times you look like a cutout, sitting so still.
Damn.
Somehow you were here an hour early, but almost managed to be late for the show, talking to my grandkids. But none of that matters now, Carm. Tell me. You said, let's focus on Maggie. Poor Susan, we brought her into this. Don't worry, Susan. We'll survive together.
Susan, you also have to know how to do family counseling when you deal with us.
Carl,
hey, I just want to let you know, I am actually a licensed family counselor.
Great. So
we'll use your services after this.
I said that Joel is doing an absolutely fabulous job, and I'm smart enough to know that he really doesn't need me. This is now a charity visit once a week.
I'm already getting yelled at. Fairy Princess. Hold on. Fairy Princess says, please show the utmost respect. My mother was from the old country. So is Carm.
So to make the long story short, I said to Joel, Susan, I said to Joel, we are talking about this case and over and analyzing, and the two victims, especially Maggie, is treated like a sack of potatoes. The only thing that was discussed about her during the trial and so forth was a footprint on the back of her leg. There was nothing more humane or human about it, except they were discussing at length, was it a shoe print or wasn't that a shoe print? And they were not paying attention to the whole person. I said, since she was so horribly murdered, I think she deserves at least to let people know who she is.
And Karin, we usually have two best guests, but you're actually one of the two best guests tonight. So what have you taken away in your studies about Maggie Murdaugh to this point?
Well, like all of us, Maggie is a very complex person. There are many facets to her personality. And she has had a long, even though she was killed at the age of 52, yes, even though she was relatively young, she still had a long life before that, with a lot of segments to it, her childhood, her college years, her early marriage.
And we're going to get into
so
all
forth.
that. But what you have a singular takeaway about Maggie that you'd like to get started with?
I have a need to bring her up and talk about her in the cultural context of where she lived. Okay? So that's what my focus would be. I'm not jumping into she was a horrible person or she was a saint. I'm just saying that she should be looked at and recognized as a complete person as much as we possibly can.
And Fairy Princess writes, I have so much respect for your mother's experience and wisdom. And Jamie Ye says, let Carm shine. I would never do otherwise.
My God.
We have a first comment in from 503 Decal. Do you think the financial was so bad for murder, though? ? A happy marriage can overcome so much, can't it? Susan, to you, there are conflicting reports, but it appears there were cracks in the marriage leading up to this heinous double murder. And I want to say for the record, Alex Murdaugh is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. But do you think it was too much for Maggie Murdaugh and she started to really pull away? Is that your gut instinct or what are you thinking?
My gut instinct is that she was aware that he was misappropriating money. She became very worried about it. She started to do her own kind of backgrounding, checking and investigating herself into her own financial situation. I think the straw that broke the camel's back was embarrassment when she wrote the check for the charity that she so beloved and then finds out that it's been, that it bounces. I mean, that was so humiliating for her. So I think that she was already, based on what I was reading, that she was already suspect, that there was some weird behavior going on, that she wasn't immune to it. But just like what your mom is saying, as a psychologist for many years, I think that just women in general will, when they're encountering these types of men in their life, like he was, and she wanted to believe in her husband, right? Because he says, I'm going to fix it no matter what, right? I'm going to fix it no matter what, just like I always have. She's going on and she's trusting and trusting and trusting and, setting her own feelings aside and just still believing in him. And that is a real problem because she was losing herself in it. She was losing herself and she was empowering him and trusting him to be able to make these right decisions. The thing is, did it rise to the level of where it was enough for him to commit murder, to kill his wife and his son? And, it's really interesting because it really just depends on the person, right? So we've seen people rob somebody for $75, right? Shoot somebody for $75. So what is going on in that person's mind? I would assume that he had gotten to the point where, like a Madoff, that he couldn't hide it any longer. It was all coming down. At that point, he was frantic. He wasn't thinking. He was flooded. He didn't know how to actually fix the problem. But the problem with him is it's really more about his ego and his status. So what you have to figure out when people what drives them there, it's not just one thing, right? So he is a type of person that's highly narcissistic. I think Mom would agree with me, right? We're dealing with a sociopathic type of personality, and it just is built over time. And so we've gotten to the point of this crescendo that he was about to do anything and anything to save his butt.
And
can we backtrack?
Yeah, real quick. Let me just real quick. Give me 1 second, Carm. So Susan mentioned a charity check that bounced, and this was reported in multiple media outlets, but a source did speak to the Daily Mail, which is a little bit of a gossip rag, so do with it what you will. But this source explained, and I quote here, "I remember one day, it must have been a few months before she was killed, she was crying because she had written a check at a charity luncheon and it had bounced." And again, Alex Murdaugh, his response to her was always the same. And I quote, he'd always tell her not to worry about it, that he'd figured out, he'd fix it. Carm, what would you like to...
What I would like to backtrack a little, Susan, and give a little background of the milieu, of the customs of the land there, and also the person in question. Maggie had an older sister, and very loving parents with whom allegedly, according to everything I've read, she had a very warm relationship. And she finished high school. She had a nice, a good experience in Nashville in high school. That's where she went.
Nope, she went to high school in Pennsylvania.
She was born in Nashville. And then she, their father was transferred to South Carolina
eventually,
and she went to college in
University of South Carolina.
University of South Carolina, but her life script, because of her background, her parents were from Kentucky, and then they lived in Nashville and Pennsylvania. And they were relatively conservative people, I think. And her life script was not very different from my life script: to go to college and meet a nice, good husband and have children and live happily ever after. And that was, she was very attractive. She was slim. She was bright. And she met Alex. And they fell in love, whatever the word defines to different people. And he asked her to marry him with the condition that they live in what is the
South
place?
Carolina.
No, but in his family.
In Colton County.
County.
Yes.
And she, even though she felt the place was very isolated, there was not. They say there was not even a Kmart. Walmart. It was very rural. There's no Kmart altogether.
Kmart's gone, but
so she agreed and she married him.
And this is right to your point, Carm, here, because I did my homework just as you did your homework, Carmela. And this is another story. I believe the New York Post picked this up. Spoke to a high school friend of Maggie Murdaugh, and she said, the friend now is speaking, "We had our little cliques and we ran after boys and did a little partying and drinking. But I think her dreams," meaning Maggie, were what she was taught. She was from the South, and the Southern dream for a girl at that time was to finish college maybe, but more importantly, find a husband, get married, and have kids. And it appears that's what she did. Susan, Salt Phone has a comment up here. "I just can't believe with what we know about Alex so far, there was no infidelity." Was he too much of a narcissist to be monogamous, do you think?
Well, we don't know that for a fact. It just wasn't brought up in the trial. So no one's come forward. It doesn't mean that he didn't have infidelity. We've never heard about it. So we don't know. We don't know.
By the way, Carrie Allen says that guest, Susan, looks very good in bright pink, and I would have to agree. Yes, although I have to be careful. In the Me Too era, I had to be careful with everything I say, even to my mother.
Especially to your mother.
Paula Roberts writes, and Susan, I'll let you take this, and Carm, you can piggyback off of Susan's take on this. Paula Roberts writes, Alec had pent up narcissistic rage towards Paul's boat accident, opening up Alex's financial scams, and rage at Maggie for not signing off an Edisto house and her wanting a divorce. That's the beach home. What do you make of that?
He's just getting caught. I mean, what we're looking at is that it's the walls are closing in, right? So he is the thing. What I'm trying to explain to you is that narcissists, their number one thing that they cherish is their status and their ego, right? What they are, who they are, this false persona, who they are. So now what be underlying this narcissistic behavior can be rage, especially when they're exposed. So the fact that all of these events that are happening, all that's doing is just building up more and more anger and rage. And that's really concerning to me, because this in itself was a precursor to imminent violence to occur. The reason why I say that is I teach threat assessment courses, and we look for behaviors that are precursors to a person who has the capability of following through with a violent act. I'll give you an example. You know, we've talked about, which is a little bit off this, but we talk about the Idaho murders. I took his one of his posts that he had made on Facebook, ran it through my Decipher program, which is out of Sweden, which they use for imminent threat. 95% a surety this guy is going to commit a violent act. So what my point is that behaviors are indicators of a person's future behavior to act out. So yes, he was angry here, he was angry there, but it's building up. It's really his, and I think your mom will agree, she's in psychology, is that there is obviously some sort of character issue that stemmed way before these occurred, that this guy feels a sense of entitlement, right? This ego, this prestige, the status, all of that. He raised to such a level because underneath that, he was such a broken, insecure, frail person. And when somebody started poking the bear at things that he was doing, the rage came out, and it was just a fire that didn't stop.
Well, I don't think it started. The word started. I think that this thing was going on for many, many, many years. His addiction to painkillers, his diverting money from his law firm, he's basically lying. And I think that Maggie, who is our main topic this time.
Correct. Thanks to you, Carmela.
Thanks to me, because I think she deserves it. I mean, she's dead, and she had a horrible death, and we don't even talk about what happened to her. I think she bought into the lifestyle of the Murdaughs, the most important, prominent people of this area of South Carolina, and for many generations, and paintings in the courthouse of the ancestors and so forth. And she liked that part. Okay. And when she saw these things that he did, Alec, she sort of put her head in the sand in a certain way. I accuse her of that. You know, you don't know things if you don't want to know things. You know, if you want to pretend you don't know to yourself, that's a very sad thing. And that's what she did. And what she allegedly, she focused her life to on her two children, and with her husband, she had a seemingly loving relationship, but I think communication was at zero. I don't think they really talked about issues that really mattered. I think they talked about other things, where they are going on next vacation or whatever. They weren't really communicating. He
wasn't substantive.
He came from a background where you don't share the headaches and the stresses and so forth, you don't share with your wife.
Yes, they're living a little bit in the 1950s. This friend was also quoted that I quoted earlier, who was a friend of Maggie's, wrote about Alec, or said about Alec, he was just so checked out of the family by the end, he never gave her, Maggie, any real answers that I heard, to your point, Carmela. Now, Susan, there's a comment up here from Salty Fishing Girl. Greed was the other woman for Alec. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I think it stems from greed. I mean, to your mom's point, there's a lot of things that lead up to why a person does what they do. It's not just one. It's not just greed. What preceded the greed, right? So preceded the greed could be envy, jealousy, right? From wanting to have something grandeur, someone that wanted to be an attention seeker, someone that was to be idolized. There's a lot of things that go behind it. It's a multi-layered issue here that just started to build and kind of created this storm that happened. It's this case to me is very fascinating because, when you look at him, you look at him, and if he didn't open his mouth and he didn't know anything, he looked like a nice guy, right? And that's what part of that persona is. They can be likable, approachable, they can be charismatic, they have a great image, and she fell for it, right? Here she's in college, and she meets this Prince Charming, and that, like, to your mom's point of back then, it's like, all she wanted to do was just be married and be a wife, and a wife to her husband, and lived in a small community, and she was happy with that. But he also raised her status. That's what she fell in love with. It's the image, right? The status that he had, because he was a protector, the one that was going to be the supporter. I mean, that's what a lot of women went for. Not that they were doing it because they were pursuing that, for money. So that's what we were taught. Get married. The husband is the breadwinner. The breadwinner takes care of the family. That's what she probably was, kind of the Joan Cleaver days. And, and I think of like this area is almost like, to me, like Amish country, right? It's almost like this Pennsylvania Dutch, Amish country, where they're just this wholesome woman. She went to college and she met this nice guy, and he seemed to be, probably was quite dapper and tall, and kind of swooped her off her feet. And, the rest is history. She decided, yes, I'll move into this small area and live on a farm and everything. But look what he created. Really, I mean, he was a big fish in a small pond.
100%.
Then, but wait one more second. The marriage went along and was functional.
Mm-hmm.
This is my imagination that this is what was going on. Alex's father was bailing him out every time he got into trouble. That was documented in several places that I saw, that while his father was capable of doing that, he could rescue Alec every time he did something that was against the law, or in danger of losing his law license. But once the father became so severely ill, the mother had Alzheimer's, I think he lost that crutch or that support.
Mm-hmm.
And that
it's interesting,
careened off even further.
It's interesting because Randolph Murdaugh, the father, who has since passed away, was, like you said, bailing out the father, Alex Murdaugh, but then the pattern continued. And I understand that Randolph was also a drug user. Now, Alec became a drug user, and then Paul, who we'll get into a little bit, Alec was bailing out Paul, and Paul was also using alcohol and kind of spiraling out of control. So you see 3 generations of what I think is entitlement gone wild. But we can get into that a little further. There's another comment here, and Carm, I'm going to send this one to you from Jared Smith. Is it possible the motive was to take out his family to save them from the impending financial crimes that could bankrupt them. It was just too much for Alex Murdaugh to see his family poor, so he blows out their brains. What do you think, Carm?
Totally. I don't think, I think it's not accurate, because then he should have saved the last bullet for his own head.
And Marianne says they never kill themselves. By the way, shout out to Cindy Hollenbeck, who's watching in Moscow, Idaho. We all know that name all too well. We've been covering that. We've been covering that story. And a shout out to Tilo, who likes to yell at me. She's on here. And we've got another comment from S. Comment. The banks were calling in the loans. Alec wanted to sell. He probably would have tried to screw the banks out of some of the proceeds. I mean, Susan, back to these fine. He was facing, still is, like 99 financial felonies, financial crimes. Again, what do you think is at the root of this just, I don't know, totally irresponsible behavior and now criminal behavior, that he just couldn't help himself from engaging in criminal activity when it came to finances?
Yeah, because I think that he, just like he said, that the comment that we saw in Daily Mail was he could always fix it. I think that his mantra was, no matter how bad it got, I can always fix it. I can always finagle away. I can always talk myself out of it. I can find another angle. You know, his mind is constantly moving, right? I've met a guy like that, and I've seen it happen. And I've seen him swindle money from trusting people and use that money to fuel all these other investments, and take those investments and then pay off some of their investors, and then build their trust to get more money from them. And it's a whole Ponzi scheme. But to your point is that one of the things I wanted to mention is that this reminds me of Jorn van der Sloot's. Remember him?
Yeah.
His dad, the judge, right? He was bailing him out every time he was getting in trouble. In fact, I think to the point where I think he helped.
That's Natalie Holloway, who was murdered in Aruba.
I remember.
Just for people who don't remember.
Right. And so all of this addictive behavior, and, you know, I've trained, it was really interesting because I've trained out at the casinos about how to detect liars and so forth. One thing that I found that really was interesting before I was training these investigators is I spent like a whole day just kind of hanging out at the slot machines and watching people. And I saw these behaviors: smoking, drinking, gambling a lot. So I'm looking at 3 addictions, right? Smoking, drinking, gambling. So what I'm saying is that these types of people have multiple addictive behaviors, and those should be red flags and clues to begin with. And they only get worse, and then they start getting themselves in trouble. So they start gambling a little bit more, they start smoking more, start drinking more. And, you know, it's just like there's something that obviously within their bloodline. It's kind of like when you go to the doctor and the doctor sits down and he says, okay, tell me what you've got going on in your life, right? Arthritis, cancer, whatever. And he's checking to find out, what do you have in your bloodline? Because we know that there are things that are passed down generational through that bloodline. So there's some sort of an addictive quality that gets somehow, if it's not broken, or there's a change or shift within that family unit, that bloodline, those types of behaviors are going to carry on and continue on to the next generation.
Now, back to Maggie. I will always redirect back to Maggie, because I think how did Maggie remain with him? I think they were married like 28 years or some long period of time. They have a 26-year-old son. They were married. How did she not say, this cannot continue like this, I have to leave? She did not want to know about this. She wanted to lead to the point that at one point they had a beach house an hour away.
Yeah.
And she moved into the beach house. They didn't even live under the same roof.
That's where she was living when the crime happened. And let me just, I want to weave in some, facts related to the case into the conversation. So on the evening of June 7th, 2021, that was the night of the double murder. Alex Murdaugh allegedly reached out to his wife, Maggie, and he asked her to meet him at the family's 1,700-acre estate in Islandton, South Carolina. That is a town, Islandton, South Carolina. And according to a law enforcement source close to the investigation, Alex told Maggie, which was true, that his 81-year-old father, Randolph Murdaugh III, was in failing health. That's a name straight out of a movie about the Low Country. And that Maggie, had to see him before he died. So people are wondering, and at the time, she was staying at their beach house on Edisto Island, about an hour away. Now, Maggie allegedly said she preferred to meet Alex at the hospital and not at the home, but along the way somehow consented to meeting Alex at the property. And that was really the end game, unfortunately, for her. But what's interesting, we're entering tomorrow, the third week of this trial, and you'll see here from Fotina this comment. She writes, "I thought Alex Murdaugh was guilty before the trial, but the evidence changed my mind. I think Paul was shot for Mallory Beach." That's the young woman killed in the boating accident. And then Maggie Murdaugh surprised the killer, and his shotgun was out of ammo, so he used Paul's gun. And this is a theory that the defense, is trying to raise reasonable doubt with. Do you have, Susan, can I ask you, do you have any doubt about Alex's guilt in this crime?
No.
You don't? Carm, do you?
Well, I am trying to be very logical between that tape that they did about the dog's tail.
Yes.
And that they got the actual video of that tape. And between that and the murder, there was like a 4-minute time. Correct? Now it's very hard for one character to disappear in those 4 minutes and the true murderer appear. So just on those grounds, it's a virtual impossibility. I don't know how the defense will waltz out of this situation, because it doesn't hold water that they had such a small amount of time that you couldn't exchange Alex for the real murderer.
Yeah.
Do you see that?
Yeah, I see that point, and I'm reading Jamie Ye's comment, which I love. Carm understands the assignment. I love it, she writes.
Thank you. I am very intimidated by my boss.
Yeah. So Hannah WH writes, we'll call her Hannah Whitehouse here. Do you think he planned to take himself out too and just couldn't do it, Susan? Or was he too much of a narcissist where the thought about killing himself didn't even cross his mind?
Well, he was shot right in his head, but it was like just a side of it or something. So to me, that seemed too staged like for me. I was like, well, yeah, of course he didn't blow his brains out. It was just skimmed his head or he was injured.
But
so
that wasn't the night of the murder.
No,
that was a separate time.
But who pulled the trigger at
a
that
guy
time?
named Cousin Eddie.
Well, Cousin Eddie could have killed him for the same time.
And now Alex Murdaugh has also publicly stated, at least the defense team, that they believe that Cousin Eddie could be responsible for the crimes. I have had Amy Zimmercheck on the show twice so far. She's coming on this week, and she represents Cousin Eddie and says there's absolutely no way. She knows her client. She actually has the best criminal defense record in the state of South Carolina for her defendants, and says there's just no way he could have done it, for whatever that is worth. But so here's an interesting comment. I did not know this, from LK. Last minute, her estate administrator was changed to Alex Murdaugh's ailing father, Randolph Murdaugh. Up until that point, she had her sis,
No.
Maggie Murdaugh, as trustee to take
No.
care of her estate.
No.
This is not true. Carmela's saying no, LK.
No, LK, it's true. But this happened in 2005. She wrote a will, and the beneficiary, the one who, who decides what to do with the money? What is it called? Anyway, was the signature on it was had to be her sister.
The executor?
The executor. I couldn't find it.
Only I can interpret Carmela's
I need
thinking.
him,
and it takes me a second still.
It is very funny. It's like he interprets from English to English, translates from English.
Yes.
But in 2005, she had this signature that her sister is going to do it. And then it was literally crossed over, and the name of her father-in-law was put in instead.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has been like that since 2005.
Carm, I know you so well that I can figure out executor. And I know that the second you get off of this and we're done, you're going to say, did you see how much I knew? You're going to boast about how much you knew and know about this case.
Because this is my baby.
We're very proud of you. So Shivani writes,
okay, go ahead.
Shivani, you can't hog the whole show, Carm.
No,
you can only hog some of the show.
Bad.
Shivani writes, Paul Murdaugh had been a source of problems repeatedly. Susan, to you, obviously he was involved in this horrific boat crash that takes the life of 19-year-old Mallory Beach. I believe she was 19. Always get the age confused with the young man, Stephen Smith, who was also killed. But Paul liked to drink. As a matter of fact, he drank so much that he had a name for his alter ego. He would call himself Timmy when he was in a drunken rage, which is interesting to me. You think that was enough, just Paul acting out and basically exposing the family and their financial issues, that it made Alex snap?
Again, it goes back to he's a narcissist, and everything's starting to crumble in on him. So they become unglued. This is all about when they don't have control, they try to gain more control. So it's very sick. You can't, especially with a narcissist, there's no cure for it. There's no cure because they don't think that they have a problem. They have a very godlike persona. So everything they're doing is okay. So anyway, and I'm looking at this and I'm listening to everything you guys are talking about. And past behavior is a predictor of future behavior. All you have to do is, just like anything else, is follow the trail. One of the things I recommend, and I know, Mom, and I'm going to call you Mom because I feel close to you already. But
Carm.
Carm, okay, Carm. So I really encourage women that when they meet someone, especially if they're online or if they're introduced to someone like where she was, but Maggie was early on, but of course Maggie didn't have the internet back then. But today's different, right? Check them out. Go into their court records and find out what's in their court records. Are there lots of tickets? Are they speeding? They've revoked licenses? They have DUIs? So this is giving you a pattern of behavior that's telling you this person has the propensity of doing great harm to other people. No one just comes out of the box like that. There is something that has preceded it, and it's built, and they've gotten away with it. They've gotten more clever. Narcissism builds, gets more clever, and that's what continues to go on. And he thought he could fix it all, and he couldn't.
But Susan, would you agree with me? I agree 100%, but would you agree? Sometimes we find out things about people that are negative, but we want it so much to be positive.
Yes.
That we put the blinders on not to see the negative.
And I think Maggie,
in other words, we lie to ourselves. I always used to say to my children, don't lie to yourself, please.
Yeah, self-deception.
Yeah. So there's an interesting kind of a tidbit that I don't think a lot of people picked up on. But according to these reports, when Maggie arrives at the estate the night of the murders, and she, by the way, she had a real passion for dogs, so she loved to be around those dogs, which I can relate to. When she arrived at the estate and was at the kennels, she left her car running and walked to the kennels. That says a lot without saying much. Right, Susan?
Yes, it does. It does. And I read that too. And I thought, okay, so why does she have her car running? It's because first of all, she's not intending to stay, right? So that was the whole point. I'm going to go in and I'm going to come out. But she had always said, if it were true, that something seemed fishy. So something seemed fishy, and she already texted, something that seems fishy, then she's not intending to stay. She's just going to check it out, get there, and come back. She didn't turn off the ignition. She didn't do any of that. And look what happened. Her instincts were correct. See, and the thing is I hear this over and over and over again, and I build this into my kids' brains. I have 2 young girls. Do not ever second guess ever one time, ever. It is not acceptable. You will not. Don't explain it away. Don't try to defend it. Look at the facts, look at what you see, and don't get so emotionally involved that you are not using your critical thinking and make a good decision. And that is my biggest pet peeve. It's like women, and men do the same thing. Please. It is mind-boggling to me, and I hear it over and over again, and then they try to explain it away. Well, they're better now, or, they treated me better. Well, of course they would. This is part of the narcissist personality disorder. This is what they do. They're snake charmers. So, if there's, and I was on Dr. Phil, and it was on a missing person cases, and that's the one thing that I said on there: do not ever explain it away. If you see a sign, act on it. Don't rationalize it. Don't overthink it. Don't do anything. I have a friend of mine right now where she had an old boyfriend that had threatened that he was going to kill her. So she says, well, I don't know whether. I says, no, you go right down. You file an injunction. That's a threat. You start to build a paper trail. Don't wait. Don't delay. Go do it now. Because otherwise, how many of these people end up dead over and over again?
I have an 8 and a 7-year-old girl and a 3-year-old boy, and I'm going to have a heart attack tonight. This is too much for a Sunday night for me. But I don't want to get gruesome here and too graphic, but I need to go here because I want to get your guys' take on this. So Paul was shot in the chest and head with a shotgun at close range. There was eyewitness testimony from first responders the first day of the trial, and this is graphic, that his brain was by his ankles. Mm-hmm. Maggie was shot multiple times, including one shot in the back and additional shots while she was lying on the ground. Carmela, if Alex Murdaugh is convicted and he is proven to be the killer, what does this say in the manner in which they were killed? What does it say about the person who committed these acts?
He was in a state of rage. And he did it. And I think probably 5 minutes later, he regretted doing it. One of the interesting things for me, the culture I come from, in Miami Beach, I am not used to having so many guns and so many cars. They seem to have tons of different types of guns, and they are forever going hunting. And they know that when is the season for the quails, when is the season for the deer. And there is a lot of shooting and killing. And even in their real life, there is a lot of shooting and killing.
Yeah. Jewish guys from suburban New Jersey like myself, I don't know how to fire a gun. I wish I did, but I need to learn.
I took one lesson. I wanted to know what
Carm has been on the gun range more than I have. But Susan, you kind of opened your eyes wide open when Carm said that she thinks that Alex Murdaugh regretted it 5 minutes later. You don't agree?
No, I do not. I'm sorry. I don't agree with that one, because how do you have regret when you don't even have empathy and compassion? It doesn't go hand in hand. If you are a true narcissist, a sociopath, you are void of any sort of regret. I think that what he regrets is that he got caught.
That's right. That's part
Yeah,
of it.
that's a regret he
Part
had.
of it, part of it was like the rage was discharged with the gun. And after the rage, it's a sort of an emptiness.
Interesting analysis. By the way, Kathy Hoskin writes, "Let your mom talk!" Exclamation mark. You're very rude to her. I honestly have to come to these shows with duct tape over my mouth because no matter what I do,
No, but the problem is
I
that
get
now
yelled at.
you are doing magnificently without me, and I'm your only charity case, and you got used to running the show.
Clamoring for Carm will be the new Sunday night show. Not Carm on the case.
Not necessarily.
You'll be here every Sunday night.
Not necessarily, but
Carm,
it
don't
will
play
be
hard
a great,
to don't play hard
it's
to
a
get
great
now.
pleasure. But
This is your granddaughter's name. This next comment, Eden or Eden. We call your granddaughter Eden. I don't care if Alex Murdaugh was having an affair. I care that people die around him. He reminds me of Lori Vallow. Yes, totally different, but similar on one level. She's a woman that had an affair, and her kids were murdered. Susan, is that a good point? I mean, have all the affairs you want. Just don't go and murder people.
Yeah, I mean, the Vallow case, that was a whole thing around a cult, right? A whole cult, philosophy, belief, whatever. And she looked at them being these crazy aliens and stuff like that and believed it. So, I don't care if it were, I don't care on any case. I don't care how many affairs you had. It doesn't really matter. That's just a character issue to me, a flaw in their character. But when people are being damaged by they're losing their lives over your choices in your life, yes, I mean, obviously that takes it to a whole different level. They're two separate issues for me.
If you every time a person has an affair, somebody has to die, the population would thin out terribly, because affairs are almost part of the culture. I don't say everybody has them, but it's certainly not a tremendous rarity.
Not part of my culture. Well, I have no time with. I don't understand how people have time. Susan, I was thinking about something, and maybe you can help me answer this. I was watching Alex Murdaugh very closely in court. He's crying a lot. Assuming he committed this heinous act, do you think he has empathy now, or what do you think those emotions are that we're seeing? Is it that he's caught? What do you make of it?
Well, you see him rocking a lot, doing this. That's self-soothing. It's just like anybody that's, touching their arms or touching their hair, or rubbing their legs, whatever. That's a self-soothing gesture. So that rocking is self-soothing. So I've been watching him to find out when he actually starts that. And it almost seems as if it starts right at those moments where there's these graphic details of the murder. So then he starts to rock, right? So without knowing everything's going, because we don't have like all the information, is that a ploy? Is it a ploy to say, because when you lean forward, it's sadness, right? It also can be regret. It can also be shame. It can also be his own feeling about what's happening to him because of it. And so when I think about just him as a person, of what extent of things that he's done and how he's harmed so many people, and especially that young boy, the housekeeper's kid that lost all that money, this guy, all he's thinking about is himself. So when I'm watching him, he is self-soothing. Does that make sense? He's self-soothing. Everything else he's doing, he's done it for himself. Why wouldn't he self-soothe when he's now face-to-face what he's actually hearing that he did? Does he have empathy, compassion towards the person? Boy, I would love to have an MIPI too on him, do a whole psych eval, because I'd really like to see what types of personality disorders that he really has, that he just has somehow been able to detach himself emotionally.
As you said before, I agree with it, that there is something that went from generation to generation to generation. even now there is a lot of innuendo and gossip, and we don't know what is true, but allegedly it was part of the whole family pattern from generation to generation also to be unfaithful and to
Learned
do,
behaviors.
and they did certain things. Allegedly, even the people who testified, there is a certain fear among the police and so forth. Their body language reflects that, and their behavior, they're still afraid of the power of this family.
Oh, I mean, you know, and I think that's not an imagined fear. I think it's a true, real fear. People
Yeah,
are
they can still destroy people, both symbolically and literally destroy people.
Elf has a comment for Susan. Susan, what did killing his wife and son fix for Alec? Prolonging the inevitable with no support system left? I still don't get how this benefited him. And it's an interesting point because this is a problem that the state is going to face. They basically said he was looking for empathy to divert from his financial crimes. How do you respond to this question?
because I think that we're still missing the real story of why that really happened. I think there's what the state and the defense is, you know, proffering, but I think there's another piece to the story we really don't know. Why did he do it? That's going to be the big question we may never ever answer. You know, we will just may never be able to. I don't know, and for me, I would be speculating, and I don't like to speculate.
Well, I don't think he calculated it. I don't think he was smart enough at that point mentally. I think he was a mess mentally. He didn't sit down with a ledger and figure, if I kill them, these are the benefits. I think he went into a rage.
It wasn't rational.
It wasn't. I think she said no, because at this point she owned the title on the house, Maggie.
Yeah. But it seemed premeditated,
and
right?
Wait a second.
Are you saying it's not premeditated?
I would imagine that it was premeditated, but I don't know for how long. Maybe an hour. Because he asked her to sign certain documents so he could weasel his way out of this latest debacle of the financial situation, which goes back to 2015 or further. But his father used to rescue him, and now she said no, she's not signing anything. She didn't want to end up homeless in the end of her life. I think he asked her to sign on maybe wrong, but on the beach house where she lived, and so she said no.
We have some breaking news, Carm. DJT, Donald John Trump, has entered the conversation, and he writes, please let Carm go home. She's not adding to the discussion. Get lost, Donald Trump. This comment says,
don't worry about it. I'm glad you.
Donald John Trump, she owns this podcast. We love Carm. Sorry, Susan. I had to get that in there. Who knew that Donald John Trump was watching our podcast? Who knew?
I think it's Donald J. Trump.
Yeah, which stands for John. Correct, Carmel. First time I'm hearing Carm, and I'm enjoying her perspective very much. Let's see what this comment from Hillary Plausch. This guy has always been a narcissist. This is what happens when their world crumbles. And I do not believe he had a drug addiction, just a way to manipulate. Same getting shot. I don't know. Same as getting shot. Yeah, with a setup there. LOL. Do you think it's possible, Susan, that he was just using drugs as a ploy to gain sympathy, or it seems part of what he's going through?
I think he had a drug addiction, and especially if you have an opioid addiction, it's a very hard addiction to get away from. And you know, we've seen this in many documentaries like Dope and some of the other ones. I think it's a very dangerous drug, and once you're on it, it's again a lot of these. The reason why do people do drugs to begin with is because, or why do they drink to themselves? The word drunk. Why do they do what they do? Is because they're self-soothing. What are they soothing that they never dealt with in their lives? What has not been repaired? Something in their developmental stages when this guy was growing up, and you know what was going on in that household to create such a a strong bloodline of these behaviors is incomprehensible. I mean, and it's like, I just really want to figure out, going back to the beginning, how I think that what's more interesting is how it all evolved. So no, the drug addiction, I don't think he did it for sympathy. In fact, that's not, I've had a case like that before. Juries could care less. You're the one that self-inflicted the drugs. You're the one that chose to take them. Even though you have drug addiction, I don't think it was for sympathy. I think it was for self-soothing.
It's interesting. A lot of people are saying that they don't think he did have a drug problem. Someone was asking about a divorce. So another media outlet you've all heard of, People Magazine, and they've actually broken quite a few stories on the Idaho 4 case, but do with it what you will, as I said about the Daily Mail. 6 weeks before the murder, Maggie Murdaugh and her son Paul obviously were murdered on the grounds of their family's home. But sources tell People that Maggie, 52, had just begun to look into the family finances to determine the state of their marital assets. She, quote, according to this source, and I quote here, she didn't pay close attention to the family money or where it came from, but now she was starting to look into it, and was, according to this report, meeting with a divorce attorney looking at the possibility of getting divorced. But Dick Harpootlian, the defense attorney, very savvy defense attorney, who's also a state senator, he disputed these reports, and his quotes are kind of funny. I even saw them holding hands, he said. Don't you think if they were splitting up and talking divorce, there'd be more proof of it by now? Carmela, if you're holding hands with a spouse, does that mean that you're madly in love and not entertaining the thought of divorce? Or do people do things for show?
It's the Facebook version, like what looks good on Facebook is not in real life, holding hand. And in other words, unfortunately, this is my fantasy, that their lives were not authentic and they were not real. A lot of things they made for appearance. She would show up at an event in a fur coat in the summer, and they were doing things for appearance sake. It was accepted. It was like in the 50s. And I think it was could have been genuine and could have been fake. In the beginning of their marriage, no question, there was physical attraction and there was love, and there were hopes for the future. But then things slowly derailed, and for a very long time they have been living. If they loved each other so much, wouldn't they want to sleep in the same bed every night, or at least in the same room, or at least in the same house?
I can't be away from my wife for more than seconds.
You see?
For more than 30 seconds, and I start to, it's actually the other way around. She texts and calls within 30 seconds. Olivia Nile writes, I need to be honest. This case has me so confused. Everything I've heard and seen is a reasonable doubt. I'll say it again. I'm fearful he will be found guilty because he isn't liked for other things. And Susan, this is right in your alley. One more quick comment for you, Susan. He looks creepy and sounds even more creepy. I mean, you're a behavioral expert. You do jury consulting. These are two sort of contradictory things, yet similar. But to what extent are jurors looking at Alec, looking at his behaviors, the rocking, the crying, and to what extent are they listening to the evidence, in your opinion? I mean, if you had to break it down like percentage-wise, obviously jurors are instructed, listen to the evidence, follow the evidence, but you can't help but be a human being, right? So as an expert in this area, to what extent are jurors going just by the evidence, and to what extent are they working off of emotion?
All right. So first of all, that's a compounded question, because there's more than just one juror. There's a panel of jurors, right? And every one of those jurors come in with a unique set of history in their background, right? And so what people tend to do is when they look at him, they are projecting someone that they may have met like him, someone they had a bad experience with that looks like him, or what he reminds them of something that's negative. Okay, not with everybody. Other people may not have. That's why first impression management is really super important, because we found that even even after the first opening statement, the jurors have already decided, most of them, guilt or innocent right there. It's very difficult to change or to sway those jurors in a different way of thinking. Appearances matter. Demeanor matters. The people that are in the gallery behind them and how they're responding matters. The way they dress matters. Their presentation matters. Their attorneys and how they're presenting themselves with their client matters. All these things matter. This is, I've worked on some pretty high profile cases, one being one of the Jeffrey Epstein case. And one of the things that I work on very strongly is witness preparation, how they present themselves in front of the jury, finding what some of their emotional triggers are, when they hear certain evidence, what's going to create that trigger that would cause them to have an emotional response at the right time. It's not that you're creating it. You're just trying to find out what emotional triggers is in that person, and the attorney needs to bring that out in the case so that the jury and the panel can see it. So someone like myself, I'm a little bit more savvy than that, because I'm looking at the timing of their gestures, when they actually emote, all their facial expressions, all the muscles move in the right directions, so that shows that authentic emotion. So I can tell you when it's not true. That's one of the reasons why I feel like I'm as good as I am at what I do, because I see beyond just the questions you ask and the responses. I'm looking at all those physiological responses. And that's the problem with him, is that this crying and the theatrics, for somebody that has a tremendous amount of empathy, someone that's easily swayed, might be easily swayed. Someone that lacks empathy, someone's an engineer, or someone that dots every I and crosses every T, they see the cries and they're like, oh, really? Are you joking me? So behind closed doors, when they get into jury deliberation, that's where all the magic happens, right? So not everybody's going to be moved by the emotional affect that he has, because you're going to have all those other analytical jurors in there. So then they're going to tie in all their past experiences. And, every juror, whether they like it or not, we're all biased. Every one of us are. We have all of our past experiences coming forward, and we do tend to project them on other people. Yes, will they look at the evidence of the case? Yes. And that's where it takes someone that's a strong person, a foreperson, to bring that all together so that they can come to a consensus of guilt or innocence.
And as Susan says, it only takes one for a hung jury. So here's some more interesting kind of color and commentary about Maggie Murdaugh. Alex was her first real boyfriend, according to reports. She would let her hair down, according to a friend, and drop some F-bombs and tell you to piss off, it says. This is a direct quote. If she felt like it, she had a great dry sense of humor. She had this thing where she'd roll her eyes when someone was doing something stupid, like Alec or Paul, but she bent over backwards for her kids, maybe to a fault. She did everything for those children. That's a consensus feeling amongst friends. I thought this was interesting. According to this person, and I quote again, she was the only one in the whole family to go see Gloria Satterfield, the family housekeeper, when she was dying in the hospital. Again, kind of a small but salient point here, Carmela. What does it say about her person? Well, this woman fell down the stairs and died.
Gloria took care of her children and helped her raise them to a large degree. She raised them, and she was attached to this babysitter, nanny, whatever, housekeeper. And she was, that was a decent thing to do, to visit her.
It's amazing.
Much more decent than take away her $4 million from her.
Yeah, well, and it's amazing that other members of the family didn't go. Now, when it came to their home in Hampton, South Carolina, this person said they were surprised by how understated the home in Hampton, South Carolina was. And the quote is, I wouldn't say it was a dump. It was nice enough, but not what you'd expect from people who literally seem to have millions of dollars to burn. I mean, they never flew commercial that I can remember. They always chartered jets. It's interesting that their house, though, was, according to this person, just so. Susan, Elizabeth Ramsey writes, and a couple more comments. We'll get some closing thoughts and we'll wrap it because Carmela's going to start to nod off in a few moments. Alec reminds me of a spoiled, actually, this is a good one for Carm here. This is what she calls me. Carm likes to call me a spoiled little brat. Alec reminds me of a spoiled little Southern boy who never had to own up to anything he ever did. Everyone always lets him get away with anything. If I'm such a spoiled brat, why are my wife and 3 kids still alive?
But it's not funny. Don't personalize it.
No, what do you make of the comment, Carm? What do you make of the comment? Was he a spoiled Southern boy who was just entitled?
Well, he wasn't entitled. You used the term, Susan. You used the term entitled. He was born entitled. They were the royalty of this low country, and everybody knew them, and they certainly got tremendous respect. What is interesting, and I don't want to open another box, even though it's my specialty, in the last minute,
especially at the end,
something completely new. But Buster, the older son, who is sitting there watching the father when you talked about the jury, and he's with the father, and apparently the father keeps calling him from the jail. A large percentage of the phone calls go to Buster, so it means the father and the son do communicate. This son also feels entitled, so according to many people who commented on his behaviors. So it goes from generation to generation of entitled and spoiled.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand that they are spoiled since they own all of, I don't know, 17,000 acres, but we don't.
1,700 acres, but they owned a ton of real estate. LK, was Maggie a philanthropist and known in the social circuits? Could that have caused resentment by her leading to the marriage becoming meh because kids were older and moving out? Susan, she was a socialite in that community. Do you think that led to her, potentially looking for a way out, looking for a divorce, and things just, I don't know, it was like a tinderbox and it just went off?
Well, let's go back to, she was the only one that showed up at the hospital, right? So she is the type of person that has compassion and empathy for other people. We also heard that when it came to her kids, right, she would almost do anything for them. So she has already built inside of her in her core being that she's a loving person. She's a kind person. So that doesn't surprise me that she's not involved in charity work, a philanthropist doing things for other people, and why she was so humiliated because her philanthropy work was so important to her that if that was true, that their check bounce was the ultimate disgust that she had. And that's what the rolling of the eyes you see. That's actually contempt and disgust altogether. She probably just had enough. And, her image, as she probably got older, she started to become a little bit more empowered. And then a little bit more empowered since she's gotten a little bit older. And she finally just said, I've had enough. But yeah, I think that was a part of it, that she was fed up, done with it. This guy's taking her down. She doesn't want any part of it. People are dying around me. I'm out of here.
One of the things everybody says who was interviewed on different podcasts and different articles, what an unbelievable mother she was. She wouldn't miss the little league games, and she participated in everything. The only criticism of her as a mother was that she did not discipline her children. And she let them do whatever they wanted to do, really. And she would say to them, you are, in this family, and you are a very special person.
This comment from Barb Nauman has come up a few times in the chat, so I have not heard of this. An escort who was forced to service Alex said in an interview he was very violent and aggressive toward her. There's someone else who said, probably quoting the same person, saying that Alec engaged in this with this person, and Alec tried to choke her. If this is true, Susan, any surprise here?
No, it just shows dominance and control, power. That's what that's the root of it, right?
Yeah.
And here, this comment from Debbie Blair, he's always trying to cover up everything, just like the murders. And Carm, someone else said he was paying debt with debt. What about that pattern of behavior, Carm?
But the Ponzi scheme type of behavior that he exhibited.
Yes.
He tried and he got away with it for a long time because of who he is and his family. Now that the accountant of the firm testified, she admitted it that in 2015 she did not look into it. She did not verify if the right check was deposited in the firm's account, or was it written to himself personally and taken to another bank. In other words, already in 2015, there were reasons to look into it, but because of who he was in the firm and his role, he was not checked.
So 503 Decal writes, Carm, and this is for both of you, but Carm, you can have a first shot at it here. Do you find it, and I'm very glad 503 Decal brought this up because I meant to and it slipped my mind. Carm, do you find it strange that Maggie's family has not come to the trial? You'd think they would be there. Not only that, they have not publicly commented. I know her father has become ill, they said, as a result of what happened to his daughter. I think he's 73 or 78. But Carm, what about the fact that there are no representatives from Maggie Murdaugh's family at the trial?
I don't think they want to put themselves through that, sitting there day after day after day for 3 weeks and watching what is the defense attorney's name?
Dick Harpootlian.
Twisting things. You can get a stroke just listening to him twisting things in a certain direction. They don't want to be exposed to all this. They went through horrors already. They don't need to relive it and listen to all the details. I think they decided very wisely. They like Markel, who doesn't comment on, doesn't pass judgment on the Adelsons.
On the Adelsons.
They don't pass judgment on.
Carm is referring to the Dan Markel murder, which is how we got into true crime, covering that story about a FSU law professor who was shot and killed by hitmen, allegedly set up by the family member, the first one going on trial in April. These next two quick comments, Susan, are for you. John Shepard, Alec is a lawyer, so how did he think he was going to get away with killing his wife and son? What did he gain other than another monstrous act of evil? Followed here by Shivani. Do you think that Buster and his uncle will testify against Alec now? But the first question, people say he's a lawyer. He would have known, he would have known how to game the system. He should never have talked to investigators. But again, is that just his hubris acting out there?
I think it's based on his personality type, thinking that he can outsmart and outdo, and his position in the community, that nothing he says is going to be used against him because of his status and his family status. So he thought he had carte blanche. That's what I think. It's interesting because I train attorneys, and not all attorneys are, I want to be respectful, because attorneys are very sharp at what they do, but they don't know everything. And when they're great when they're in the courtroom and they're in control, but when they're flipped the seat, they don't know what to do because they're not in control. So when I was listening to him talk, especially in some of these interviews in the cars, I'm like, dude, shut your mouth. Like, you're an attorney. Like, the whole thing I'm thinking about is, you know not to say those things. But then he just blurts it out. It's because the more he talked, the more he thinks he's trying to convince other people. And I just think that he really truly thinks he can just keep continuing to outsmart other people over and over and over and over again. And that was to his demise. To me, I think it's what it's going to be to his demise.
And Olivia Nile here, but how does killing his wife and his own son help him? Olivia could be any of the 12 jurors or the 6 alternates here. What's the connection? His financial allegations are persuasive, but he's not on trial for those. The state hasn't proven any nexus, Susan.
Yeah, I think that there's a story. I think that there was an attorney on the other day, last week I was on with, and I have to agree with, there's a whole story that we don't know, that probably will never be known. And why these murders occurred, we may never know why they are. But I do think that it had to do with financial. It had to do with financial and people finding out what was going on. And then the families, people that were finding out too much or that got involved or that knew too much were starting to be dissolved. I think that's what happened. And, he's got a rage issue too. So I think that this is a guy that is evil at the core. People say to me, I don't necessarily believe in evil. I said, I do. I've seen it. And I think this guy is just evil, plain and simple evil.
Just to confuse everything we talked about for over an hour, as my last comment, I have to tell you that the family had major enemies also. So that, all the enemies are kind of going to come out of the wood now because they were for many, many years intimidated and they didn't dare to do it.
100%. Susan, 2 final comments here, and then we'll get your closing thoughts on top of what we're going to see here. First one from Michelle Emberger. Oh my God, OMG, let your mom talk. Stop interrupting her. Susan, you're impartial here. Was I interrupting tonight? I was not. There have been nights where I've interrupted a lot.
No, what you do with her is that when she's talking, I'm going to start
with a behavioral expert.
No, you do the analysis, everybody.
Yeah. So what you do is when your mother is talking and maybe she may talk longer than you may want her to, you kind of raise your authority in your voice and talk a little bit louder so that then that kind of gets her to stop a little bit.
He's a little goddamn condescending in this.
No, he's not though. But I don't think I don't agree that he's interrupting you. He's politely interrupting you. He's got a show, and that's what you have to do. You have to keep things rolling.
For a long time, he'd ask me, please talk faster.
I've got to keep her on track.
It's not so easy for me to talk faster. I can talk a lot, but slowly. So because I have to gather my thoughts, and I noticed something very interesting. When we started this over 2 years ago, I thought a little bit faster. As I'm aging, and the stress is in my life, I'm looking for an alibi. I slow down a little more, and I sometimes have to look for words. I mean, there are those senior moments, but those I had already 2-3 years ago.
Just don't slow down enough to buy a gun and take it out on me. Seema,
no guns in our family. We don't know which end to use.
My eyesight's going, by the way, Carm. Seema Turna writes, what a lovely and intelligent mother you have, sir. I couldn't agree more. I could not agree.
Thank you. I like
She's been busting my you-know-what for 53 years, and there's no sign of it letting up. Every night she calls and gives me a list of what I need to do the next day, and I'm 53. And I tell her, I have an iPhone.
Why he's so wonderful.
I have to show her my notes, Susan, in my phone to prove to her that I'm responsible at 53.
No, don't make. You are like Alex. You want sympathy.
It all comes full circle. Chico's mummy. She's a friend of the show.
Yeah.
I think she's Canadian. I'm not sure. Chico's mummy. I'm sorry. But she's not American because we don't say mummy. I can't make it make sense. He was a cover-upper all his life. Committing murder is the opposite to me. It's propelling yourself into the unknown. Susan, your thoughts on this comment and your final thoughts about Maggie Murdaugh, please.
I think you'll find that one of my dear friends and hope to be my partner in our new crime show, Phil Waters, who you have on often.
Oh,
okay. He and has he stated many times before, and he has to me, that every person, given the right circumstances, has the propensity to kill. No one is exempt from that. So I go along with what he's doing because I've seen it myself and I agree with it. Now, regarding this whole case, certainly it's got lots of sizzle, lots of things, a lot of uncertainty. This is a circumstantial case. I think that the money issue was a huge piece of it. Whether all the jurors are going to agree on that, there is a possibility we could have a hung jury here. I mean, let's not just throw that one out there. You might have people in this case that are saying, hey, I just can't put two and two together, like what Chico's is saying here, right? He can do this, but I just can't jump to that place. And I guess I have, Chico, thank you so much. In my business, I've seen him do that, and for a lot less than that. So it truly is amazing what people will go to eliminate people to save their ASS explanation point.
Madeline Bullitt writes in all caps, Joel, she's screaming at me. It's Edisto. That is the name of the beach home. Forgive my non-Southern accent on that. And then we've got this comment here. Nope, that is not the comment. I hit the wrong comment. Oh, this is the comment I wanted. Carm, final comment of the night from A New Day. And she writes in all caps, guilty. Carm, is Alex Murdaugh guilty of killing his son and his wife, Maggie?
Innocent until proven guilty. Did I wiggle out of this one?
Yes, you did.
We have to tune in next week for the next episode.
And Carm, what are your final thoughts on Maggie Murdaugh? You're a social worker. You help poor people that were indigent, people that were drug users during your career. And you called me and you said Maggie has been forgotten in this whole story. And now we've spoken about her for 1 hour and 21 minutes and 58 seconds because of you. Does the spotlight need to be shown on Maggie more? Is that a word, shown? Shine.
Shine. The spotlight shine. I think we did a good job. I'm always pleased with my job. I don't know why. But we did a good job. She was like the forgotten person in all this. As I said in the beginning, the only thing they talked about was the footprint on her leg. She was like a sack of potatoes, just lying there. And we gave her, we made her real, and we are not saying that Alex is guilty. We are now saying he's innocent until proven guilty. But somebody killed that woman, and she should be remembered.
We have the best guests in all of true crime, as you just saw. Susan Clementine rhymes with true crime in a way. She's a jury consultant, and I didn't pull up your bio for the end here, but she is the owner of the Human Behavior Lab, a very interesting woman who you've got to be careful in front of because she will read your body language.
Right here in Florida.
Right here. She's looking at you. La Lisa, final quote of the night. I think he killed them to make people forget the financial crimes and feel sorry for him. No one wants to kick a man while he's down. He thought wrong. It's interesting. I brought that up, La Lisa, because that is right now the main argument from the state against Alex Murdaugh, the state of South Carolina. And we'll be following this case all week. We'll also be doing something on Brian Kohberger. And then Friday, it's time for True Crime with Phil and Gil, your True Crime Phil with Phil Waters, the one and only. Susan, I'm going to send you a picture of Phil that he sent me this weekend. I've already tweeted it out. He's in his Ferrari. Let's just say that with his Magnum PI shirt. Everyone watching, love you, America.
Love
Please
you, America.
Don't be too hard on me about Carm.
No, he's the best son under the sun, and I made it official. Now I came out and said this. You think it was easy to say? You think it was easy to say something so positive, but he truly is the best son.
And the best mom. Love you, America.
Love you. Bye.